For me, such an approach of paying attention in the uptakes would focus students on the transitional spaces, the interstices, the in-betweens, where uptakes take place. And I've become obsessed with the in-betweens, right? The interstitial. We know from transfer research that near transfer is the transfer of knowledge and skills across perceptually similar contexts. Like learning how to drive a sedan transfers pretty automatically driving an SUV. Okay, if you've ever rented a car, it probably takes you a couple minutes to get acquainted with the dashboard, but then you're off and going, right? If you rent a car in Ireland, you know, everything is hyper thinking because I got to find a way to, right? Our brains are very good at engaging habitual thinking when we're in similar situations. That's why knowledge transfer tends to happen automatically in similar situations. We don't have to think about it. You know, when we cross the street, we don't think too much. If you cross the street in Ireland, right, you have to look many, many times, and they actually cue you by having an arrow on the street telling you traffic's coming this way, right? And you have to engage in much more deliberate thinking. Okay, so transfer research, we know from transfer research that near transfer is fairly unconscious and automatic. Near transfer involves what Daniel Kahneman has called fast thinking, a form of routinized thinking that enables us to negotiate uptakes without cognitive overload. If we didn't have fast thinking, we couldn't function. Think about things you do every single day. Think about those times when you've been driving and your brain wandered, and then you came back and you realized, where was I these last minute? I wasn't even aware of what I was doing, right? You were operating in routinized behavior. Within activity systems, that's what genres do. They enable fast thinking, especially when they've been learned. Okay? Or I would say, I want to try to take Kahneman's thinking and apply to uptake. They enable fast uptakes. Okay? Genres enable fast uptakes when we engage habitually. I have taken to calling fast uptakes once upon a time uptakes, because of the way they ritualize our behaviors and quickly prepare us for what to expect. We know exactly what's going to come next when we think about it, unless someone's being creative with that. Far transfer, the transfer of knowledge and skills across different contexts, however, requires slow uptakes. What Perkins and Solomon, transfer researchers, have described as deliberate, mindful abstraction of skills and knowledge across dissimilar contexts. You cannot engage in far transfer with fast thinking. Okay? When a student writes a 5-paragraph essay in response to an assignment asking for a technical report, that student is likely engaging in fast, once-upon-a-time thinking when the rhetorical situation requires slow uptake. An uptake that involves taking stock, figuring out what the student already knows and does not know, abstracting from, adapting, and translating prior genre knowledge. Positioned as it is on the edges of the university, is a really cool kind of in-between space itself. First-year writing classes can be productive sites for students to think critically and slowly about the nature of transitions, the negotiation between prior and new knowledge, how to know with the discursive resources they bring with them, as well as their prior knowledge. If fast uptakes involve once-upon-a-time thinking, then slow uptakes involve what I have begun to call, courtesy of my favorite poem by Dylan Thomas, Fernhill, once below a time thinking. Isn't that a great poem, Fernhill?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good on you.
He says, once below a time. What happens then, right? When we encounter once below a time, we are forced to slow down. Invited to linger longer and to consider what it means to think about time in this way. It also changes our relationship to the more familiar once upon a time. Because you think about, oh, there's a time that sits apart, No, there's a onceness that sits above time and a onceness below time, right? It disorients your thinking and it requires you to engage in deliberate, mindful thinking. That's what the great thing about art and poetry is. Inviting students similarly to engage in acts of translation in which, say, they recontextualize familiar genres or other discursive resources and then reflect on those performances, not only teaches students valuable rhetorical skills, it also creates reflective space for students to examine the uptakes made possible through different genres, languages, and forms of expression. At key points of transition, we can ask students to think critically about their uptake encounters and performances, to think about what a particular task is asking them to do, to think about what it reminds them of, and how it might be similar to or different from other tasks they have done, to monitor the ways they went about solving a problem and performing a task, to consider what they want to remember from an experience, and how they can know with it in the future. How they know with it, right? Not know how, but know with. By asking students to spend time in these in-between spaces, we provide them with opportunities to develop their metacognitive engagement with uptake. Okay, so my last paragraph. And by giving students opportunities to work across genres and to engage in both conventional and unconventional uptakes, we can also teach them how to see and sell uptakes, like I said earlier, that may not, people may not be ready for. Okay, I'm fascinated by how when you read a poem, your uptake memory prepares you to linger longer. So you see Once Below a Time and you enjoy it, rather than get annoyed if you see something like that in a student. It's not that far off to see an international student taking a phrase. My first job was at a gas station owned by an Armenian family. And the owner would always, before he left, he would say, "I'll be back like a fire." Okay? I still talk about that. I'm sure it had to do something with maybe in a flash, but I don't know. But I still use it. Right? But you could easily say this is a sign of a non-native speaker, which it was. But I understood what it meant, and I was willing to engage in that uptake, to take that up in a way that treated like poetry. If we read our students' work with a poet's disposition, I think everyone will be better off. Okay, so what I've tried to do tonight is to describe uptake as a dynamic side of agency that invites us to recognize the interlocking systems and forces at play in the performance of genres in ways that exceed genre knowledge alone. And as sites of such agency, uptake involves both the instantiation and regulation of power, as well as the potential for intervention. Such a thick attention to uptake and critical engagement with our uptakes is particularly difficult because uptakes, again, exist often out of our purview. The key is to delay the uptakes long enough for us to critically examine their sources and motivations, as well as to consider what is permitted and what is excluded by these uptakes, how they operate in relation to other genres or not, how they are shaped by power relations in the in-between spaces where genre performances play out.